there was a lot of you had different pockets of musical what people were into in high school in the UK. You would have your Duran Duran types and Wham and George Michael. You'd have your AC/DC and Iron Maiden types, your Gothic types as well, and then there was like the U2, Big Country, Simple Minds, and I listened to everything. You know, I didn't bat an eyelid with buying Fantastic by Wham and then Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast, or U2 or Simple Minds. And I love Simple Minds. I've probably seen them more than any other band.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and joining me in one of our timey-wimey episodes, where it is my morning, his afternoon, is Paul. Welcome, Paul.
How you doing, Jesse?
I am great. So I am so glad you took time to join me.
Yep, me too. Good.
Yeah, so tell us a little about yourself.
I'm Paul. I live in England. I live in a place called Stafford in England. Bruce fans might know it because he did actually play here in Stafford back in 1981 on the River Tour in the what we call the County Showground, and where they sell. It's a livestock market basically, and if you've ever read a book by Dave Marsh, Glory Days, released in the 80s, it actually mentions the gig in that particular book because it still smelt of livestock when they actually did the gig, because they just had a farmer's market or a livestock market the day before the show. Yeah, but that's still going. It's still up and running. I actually went there last week to have my COVID vaccination. So that's all good. And living here in Stafford. I work on the trains on the railway. I'm a ticket man, ticket inspector on the railway, and I've been doing that for about almost 20 years now.
Wow. Well, first off, congratulations on getting your vaccine. I know
Thank
that's
you.
exciting. Every time I hear someone is getting a vaccine, I'm so happy because that's one step closer to us getting live music again.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. So what's interesting is my grandparents, or at least I think it's interesting, my grandparents owned a dairy farm. And One of my happiest memories is my grandfather taking me to what I called the sell barn. It was once a week they had an auction where they would go and they would sell sheep and cattle and horses.
Yeah.
And I just thought of it was the barn where they sell stuff. So it was a sale barn. And I would go with him and I would be fascinated by, you're sitting there in there's the arena down there where the auction pit where they're selling the animals, and you could go beforehand and go through and look at everything. And then you'd sit there with, like a soft drink that your grandfather bought you, and you'd watch all these animals and you'd hear the auctioneer, So it's one of my happy memories. So I would probably smell all that and go back to my childhood and think, oh man, this smells great.
Yeah, we had where I grew up, which is about 5 miles away from where I live at the moment. I stay close to home. We had a farmer's market, and I always could never understand what they were bidding with the auctioneers. They talk so fast.
Yes, they do.
How do they do that? How do they do? It's it's a big farming community around here. I mean, it's a small town of about, I'd say we've got about 100,000, 130,000 at the last census here in Stafford. But between where I live in Stafford and where I work, which is a place called Wolverhampton, home to a famous Wolverhampton band called Slade. I don't think they did a lot in America, but they were big over here in the 1970s. Anyway, between here and there, it's a lot of farmland, a lot of there's dairy farms, there's sheep farms, there's and where my wife's parents live, they live in Wales. So when we drive, it's like a 2-3 hour drive, and you go past a lot of farms. So it's a lot of farmland around here.
Yeah, in fact, my grandfather told the story. I don't remember this, but I guess I moved my hand during one of the auctions, and the auctioneer thought I was bidding, and my grandfather had to go, no, he's 9, no.
My father did that in a car auction once. He scratched his nose, he had an itch on his nose.
Yes.
He bought the car, but he didn't realise until after the auction had finished. I said, "No, you bought the car." I said, "No, I haven't." He said, "You bid it." I said, "No, I didn't."
That's hilarious. Yeah, that's great. Well, Paul, how are you doing? You mentioned working on the trains. Have you been working the whole time during the pandemic?
Yes, we have. We're one of the few, I mean, apart from supermarkets and all the other essential shops that are open, and obviously people in the medical industry and, the whatever. Yeah, we've been pretty much continuing throughout. I mean, we've been lucky in a way because the government stepped in and basically pays us. Basically, because I work for a private company. It used to be Virgin Trains, used to be owned by Richard Branson. He lost the franchise a couple of years ago, and a new company called Avanti, half British, half Italian, are now running this railway line in the UK. And but because it's a private company, because obviously during lockdown nobody was travelling anywhere, or not supposed to be travelling anywhere, apart from key workers getting to and from work, there wasn't many people travelling on the trains. So in order for us to keep operating as a business, the government has stepped in and is covering the company's losses. The company is still making a small percentage on profit, but any losses they incur, such as obviously paying for the usage of the track, the electric, what have you, the rolling stock, paying our wages, the food on the train and what have you, that is all covered by the government at the moment. So we have been very lucky. I know there's a lot of my friends have been furloughed. My wife's mother was furloughed, and a lot of people have been losing their jobs as well. So I sort of, touch wood, we've been very lucky that I'm in an industry that has kept us, kept working basically.
Mm-hmm. And did you, are you back on the train now?
I'm off for 2 weeks. I've had every 10 weeks we get a week of rest days. Okay. So we don't get, because it's a safety critical role, safety is paramount, and it's part of my job to carry out safety on the train. Every 10 weeks we are given a week of rest days to so we don't get overly tired when we're doing our job. But also next week I'm on annual leave. I was supposed to be going on, well, we didn't book a holiday because there's nowhere we can go to at the moment because we're in lockdown, as it were, still in lockdown over here. So we're not supposed to be going anywhere until at least April. I think that's when we can start visiting places again. So last year I was 50 last year. It's my 50th year. And we had a few things planned, but didn't really happen. We did get to go to Malta at the beginning of the year, which was very nice, a beautiful little island in the Mediterranean. And we had a good week there, but we were supposed to go on a cruise. Not a cruise, sorry. We're supposed to go on a trip to India in November. I've always wanted to go to India, and we booked this trip for my 50th birthday, but because of COVID, didn't happen, unfortunately, but maybe another time.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And by the way, happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
That's a milestone birthday, so that's pretty cool. Did so you must have gotten pretty used to wearing a mask all the time.
Yeah, we have to wear a mask constantly when we're working on the trains, but also uh, wearing a mask whenever we go into any shop over here now. And, we are getting so used to it. I mean, my wife did buy me for Christmas this little Bruce Springsteen face mask here with all his album covers on, which is good. And but yeah, I think it's one of those things we're going to have to get used to for a long time. I think they're going to be the government over here has been talking that maybe in the summer you might not have to wear the mask, but definitely in winter, flu season and what have you, you're still going to have to be wearing masks when you go to work and go into shops and what have you. Not everybody likes them, and some masks are better than others. I mean, they gave us masks at work, which I don't particularly like, so I wear my own, which is more comfortable. I think it's going to be with us for a while, even with the vaccine, to be honest with you, Jesse.
Paul, I think so too. And same thing with my office. In May, I started going back into the office, and anytime we get up from our desk, we put on our masks. We will we try to remain distance. Going to the grocery store or any shop, we wear the masks. Texas has opened up a few restaurants, and so we've been able to go to um, out to eat a couple of times. We don't do it often, but we have a couple of times for something special. And the same thing while you're at while you're at your table, you don't have to wear the mask. But anytime you get up to go to the restroom or to go from the
Yeah, it's the same situation over here, um, and it's quite strange because people forget, and people all forget that you're busy talking, that you're eating your food, and I I went to the restroom at the restaurant when we was allowed to go to restaurants. I think the last time I went to a restaurant must have been June or July last year, and I was just coming out of the toilet, and this lady was going to the ladies. I was coming out the gents, obviously, and she looked at me, and her face was like one of horror. My God, I didn't know I've got to put my mask on. I said, "Yeah." I said, "When you leave your table, you're supposed to put the mask on." And she went running back to the table to get a mask. And so yeah, it's just one of those people forget.
Yeah, they really do. And and then we have the few political people over here that think that are for some reason very anti-masking, and I just don't understand it. I don't understand why you wouldn't just yeah, they're uncomfortable and my glasses fog up, but if I can save a few lives or save my own life, let's just get over it and do what's best.
That is the thing. I've been having, there's a few people I work with, a few people I chat to online who are not, let's say they don't believe the pandemic is as serious as it's been made out to be. And my attitude is, I believe it is, but my attitude to them is, even if it isn't, what is the harm? What is the harm of taking it as worst case scenario? If when you're driving your car, you put your seatbelt on. There could be no other cars on the road, but you still, by instinct, I mean, obviously it's law over here, but even if it wasn't, I think 99% of people would put a seatbelt on, especially if they've got loved ones in the car. I equate it to that. I mean, what is the harm of putting on a mask? It's not hurting you, but it's saving other people, or potentially saving other people. And there is I think, especially, our Prime Minister Boris Johnson alluded to this a few months ago, the way he does. He says, "Oh, but Britain is a freedom-loving country." And I think, well, they are, and I think people don't like to be told what to do. I know you have that problem over there, and we see a lot of American news over here, and there was British journalist for the BBC going, I think it was going around Texas, that kind of area, talking to people who were protesting. They wanted the economy opened up, and I get that people are losing their jobs, or they're it's hitting hard on their wallet as such. But I can't see how that equates to not wearing a mask. I can't see how not wearing a mask is going to help the economy. So, wear a mask, and then we can all get the economy open again. Then everyone's going to be happier for it.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, and I appreciate that. And I just truly, as we're in this together, and you're right. Let's worst case scenario, you're inconvenienced a little bit. On the best case scenario, you truly can help people and kind of limit. We just recently, 500,000 people in the U.S. died of COVID, and which is just, astronomical and so sad. So I agree. All right, we're going to move on to happier talk, though. I appreciate you doing that. Yeah. Talk about, where did you grow up, Paul, and what kind of music did your family listen to?
Grew up in it's a little place called Penkridge, which is in the little market town. Well, it's quite a big market town now. When I grew up there, it was very small. It's sort of spread out, a lot of new housing, and that is in between Stafford, where I live now, and Wolverhampton, where I work. It's about 5 miles up the road from here, so it was a real small town. And a population when I was living there, about 10,000 people, I would say. Probably double that now, if not trebled. But the music my parents listened to, they had different tastes, to be honest. My dad was a big Neil Diamond fan, and because of that, I'm a big Neil Diamond fan as well. I love Neil Diamond, and I think I'm a believer. He's one of the great pop songs ever written. Definitely top 5, in my opinion, for me anyway. And but he also listens to a lot of easy listening kind of stuff, like Mario Lanza, Perry Como. He had a Frank Sinatra. I love Frank Sinatra. He had there was an album released in the 70s, or his greatest hits, called Portrait of a Legend. I don't know if it was a UK release or if it was international, but so I listened to that, and there's some beautiful songs on there, and Shirley Bassey as well, who again more popular over here in probably than in America. But my mom's a big Rod Stewart fan, and I'm a massive Rod Stewart fan, and I grew up listening to a lot of Rod Stewart in our house because of my mom. Again, and I love Rod Stewart because of that as well. I don't think my parents listened to anything that I hated. I listened to a lot of stuff they didn't like, but I don't think they listened to anything that I particularly hated. Even the odd Perry Como track I can listen to and think, oh, that's a good song, is that?
Yeah. Did as you started getting older, did you start, talk about what kind of music as you got into, later in school and got older? What were you listening to then?
Well, when I was quite young, when I started hitting my teenage years, and my brother was a big David Bowie fan, and I got into David Bowie quite early on, probably before I got into Bruce, to be honest, because of my brother. So I was a massive David Bowie fan, still am. And the first concert I ever went to in 1987, I was 17, was David Bowie. That was in Manchester. Mm-hmm. So I was listening to David Bowie, but going back to sort of teens, there was a lot of you had different pockets of musical what people were into in high school in the UK. You would have your Duran Duran types and Wham and George Michael. You'd have your AC/DC and Iron Maiden types, your Gothic types as well. And then there was like the U2, Big Country, Simple Minds. And I listened to everything. You know, didn't bat an eyelid with buying Fantastic by Wham and then Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast, or U2 or Simple Minds. And I love Simple Minds. I've probably seen them more than any other band. I've probably seen them close to 20 times, Simple Minds, and I still love their music. But yeah, the first record I ever bought with my own money was 10cc's Dreadlock Holiday. I was 8 years old, saved up my pocket money, went down to the record store and bought this vinyl 7-inch disc, Dreadlock Holiday 10cc. And Godley and Cream used to be in them. They weren't in them at the time. I didn't realise this. I think they left around 75. But yeah, that was the first record I ever sort of bought myself. The first album I remember buying was a little bit later, was Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Welcome to the Pleasure Dome, which actually sort of inadvertently got me onto Bruce, because they did a cover version of Born to Run on that album. And 1984 that would have been, and Dancing in the Dark would have been in the charts, and Born in the USA would have been out. So I would have been aware of Bruce. But that cover version, Born to Run, made me seek out more Bruce because of Frankie Goes to Hollywood. So yeah, there's a lot of different music around at that time. The Smiths as well. The Smiths were big around that time, and I was never really a Smiths fan then, but I sort of developed a taste for them a bit later on in my 20s.
So I ask this a lot, Paul, and some people can articulate and others can't. So it's okay if you can't, but when you heard the cover of Born to Run, you decided to go explore Bruce. What about his music spoke to you?
Well, I'm a big fan of storytelling. I'm a big fan of I like reading. I like literature, and especially when I heard his early stuff, the Greetings from Ashley Park and The Wild and the Innocent. There's a lot of stories there, especially Incident on 57th Street, which is still one of my favourite Bruce songs, that it can tell a story and you get sort of lost in those characters. But also what I liked about Bruce was there was a sort of, I was an awkward kid. I was an awkward teenager. I had friends. I didn't say I didn't have friends, but I wasn't the most popular guy in class. And, I wasn't the sort of person to have girlfriends like my friends were and what have you. And I think what drew me to Bruce is I've always found there's an awkwardness to Bruce. He's not the best singer. He's not the best guitar player. He's not the best looking man. But you can relate to that. I related to him more than I could to, I don't know, who was around at the time. Somebody who's like David Lee Roth, who's, or George Michael. I mentioned George Michael earlier. How can a skinny kid like me, an awkward teenager, relate to somebody who's sophisticated,
sure, absolutely,
like a George Michael? Whereas with Bruce, there was an imperfection about it. That sort of thought, this guy, if this guy can do it, you can do it. You know what I mean? There is, as I say, there's an imperfection to Bruce that sort of draws me to him.
I think that's well said. And, he himself has talked about he did not think he was that good of a guitar player. He did not feel he was that good of a vocalist, but he felt like he had maybe a little something in songwriting. Now, as fans, we love his voice. And, I would be all in favor of him doing a cover album of great, country and western ballads or just other things, but yeah, I can see that. When Go ahead, continue, please.
No, I guess, yeah. I mean, I once read a biography of him back in the 80s when he said that, I mean, that's that old story. He saw Elvis Presley on the Ed Sullivan Show and said, "When I grow up, I want to be like that." But I listened to him talk when he was in high school, and how he was no good at sports. He was no good at fitting in with the regular. I think in America you call them jock types. I mean, there'll be sporty types over here, guys who are good at football, cricket, golf, whatever, and although I love sport, I love watching sport and even playing sport as well, I've never been any good at it. I mean, that is an understatement. And so that was sort of another related thing. I thought, oh, yeah. But when I was when I first got into Bruce in the 1980s, I had aspirations myself of being a writer, and I used to write poetry, used to read a lot of poetry, used to whatever. So to listen to those songs, the early songs, are quite poetic, and also told a story. It was sort of a bit of a I can. This is really good. I can relate to this. And I think that at that age, everybody's looking for something they can relate to. Everyone's looking for some kind of, some area or some group they can fit into. Like probably New Romantics, which was, even though I like the music, I never a New Romantic or goths, or what have you. The bikers, the mods, the rockers. We have a big thing with that in England. Between, I don't know if you've ever seen the film Quadrophenia with the Who, but yeah, that's a big thing over here. And I went through a phase of being a mod. I was a big sort of Who fan, and the Jam, Paul Weller, and still one of my favourite bands to this day. And so the only time I've ever sort of been in a gang, as it were. I'm not really much of a joiner of gangs, but the only time I was about 13, 14, we all had the green Parkers and what have you. Too young to ride a Vespa, obviously. So we had these like scooters, which we went around on, rally choppers and what have you, which ironically were like the bicycle version of the Harley Davidson. So maybe we shouldn't have been riding those. But yeah, that's so you're always looking for somewhere to, some kind of group to join when you're that age, I think.
Yeah, and I think, he's talked about that. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to hear yet, but him and former President Obama is doing a podcast.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet. I know it's on Spotify. I've seen clips of it.
Yeah.
Where they're talking about their respective fathers, and I didn't. So I need to watch more. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting because they talk about how they both felt like they were outcasts growing up. President Obama talks about growing up, as a mixed race kid in Hawaii. Bruce talking about growing up, poor in Jersey. And so I think that is one of the reason. And, I remember Jon Stewart made the joke once that when you listen to, you aren't a loser from Jersey. When you listen to Bruce's music, you become a loser in Jersey. That's an epic tale or something along that line, right? It feels. Yeah. So as you're finding more and more of his music, have you had a chance to see him live?
Oh yeah, the first time I saw him live, I was 18.
Okay.
Sheffield, 1988, on the Tunnel of Love tour. I remember it was when he was doing Born to Run as an acoustic song during that tour. And funny enough, I remember recording Radio 1 over here, BBC Radio 1, did a Springsteen broadcast from Stockholm in Sweden. And I recorded it on cassette. And it stayed with me for years afterwards. And then after numerous house moves or what have you, it's gone and I can't find it anywhere. But on Amazon Music, that recording is now, you can get that on Amazon Music. So
Oh, how funny.
Yeah. So it's good because he opens with Tunnel of Love, goes into, I think it's Adam Raised the Cane, and then he does the old, is it the John Lee Hooker song, Boom Boom Boom?
Yes.
And just listening to it takes me back to my first Springsteen gig in 1988. And I went alone. I bought the ticket from Lotus, not Lotus Records, what were they called? Yeah, I think they're called Lotus Records in Stafford. Not there anymore. Like a lot of record shops, they're gone. And so I bought the ticket, queued on a Sunday morning to buy the ticket, including coach travel up to Sheffield from Stafford. And I couldn't find anybody to go with him because there wasn't a lot. And this is another thing that attracted me to Springsteen, especially in the UK. He's got a very sort of, he's got a large fan base, but it's not a universal fan base. I find that most Springsteen fans, once they're with him throughout the duration. It's very few people who dip in. Like you'd buy. I've got an album, say, by I don't know, I think of somebody off the top of my head, Edie McKell or somebody like that.
Yes.
But I've only got one album by her. It's not like, and it's a good album, the first one, but it's not like I'm ever going to buy any more. Or you might buy a song by a one-hit wonder type song, but you're never going to buy any more of those. But with Bruce, I find that most of his fans and people I get talking to when I go and see him live, they've been with him for years. They're not the sort of, oh yeah, you know, I heard this song on the radio, I thought I'd buy a ticket last week. That doesn't seem to happen. I think once they're with him for the duration. And it's like following his career and going to his gigs. It's almost like a family get together every year, you know, and you see the sort of same faces at these concerts and what have you. Or, you know, I know a few people in Stafford who are Springsteen fans, but not many. And I like that. I like the fact that, you know, he's not, especially in the UK, I like the fact that he's not, what's the word I'm looking for? That it's almost niche in a way. You know, it's like a certain food that not everybody likes, but, you know, or a certain restaurant that, you know, the same kind of people flock to it because it speaks to them or they like it, but nobody else really gets it. And so that was another big attraction. So I'm this 18-year-old kid going to Sheffield. And yeah, it was sort of wow. This gig was fantastic. It was in the days before you would buy your ticket, you'd get into the stadium, and where you went in the stadium was unregulated. So I'd start off in the stand if I was feeling tired. It was a 4.5-hour show, so I'd go and sit down. So I'd go and sit down if I was feeling tired, or if I wanted to get a hot dog or whatever, you have a beer. But when like the encore came in, I could go down right to the front of none of this, you had to pay an extra $5,000 or pounds or whatever it is to get to the circle at the front. There was none of that back then. If you could get to the front, you could get to the front. And it was an excellent experience, an excellent gig. I think it's still my favourite Springsteen gig at the end of the day because of because it was so unregulated back in those days. Now, me and my friend of mine, we saw him at the O2 in London, 2009, December, and he did Santa Claus is Coming to Town. He also did Jungleland, and that is the only time I've heard him do that live. Clarence obviously was still alive back then. Mm-hmm. But when Santa Claus Coming to Town came on and the encore was coming on, me and my friend who I was with, Robert, we he tried to go down and into the standing area so he could get to the front, but the security came straight away. He says, no, this little spot here is where you bought your ticket for. This is where you got to stay. And so yeah, it's a bit of a difference between my first gig and that one.
Paul, I always preface this question with the amount of times you've seen Bruce is not a fair barometer of how big a fan you are, because there are people that have not seen him at all.
Well, yeah.
Economic situations or where they're located. And then there's other people that were born at the right time, living in the New York or Jersey or Philly area and saw him tons. So, but for the record, do you count how many shows you've gone to?
Oh, yeah, I think it says my internet connection is unstable. I don't know why.
I can hear you now.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So, how many times have you seen him perform live?
Oh, let's think. One, two, then we got 3, 4, 5. About 10 or 12 times.
All right, very nice.
I saw him once in the 90s. Again, that was in Sheffield. I went through a period in the 90s, but I didn't listen to Bruce all that much, to be honest. I was listening to, my musical tastes were going to different directions, but then I sort of rejoined him again at the Rising. And since the Rising, I've seen him a good 10 times since then. On the Seeger sessions. I mean, one of my favourite gigs was I saw him at the Royal Albert Hall, where he did the solo shows after Devils and Dust.
Yeah,
it was really good. That was obviously, and then he did the Seeger sessions, and since then, yeah, a couple of times. Always seems to be Manchester or London. There's Emirates Stadium in London, Manchester about 4 times. So yeah, I'd say 10 or 12 times I've seen him over the years. But going back to what you were saying about being how many times you see him isn't a barometer. One of my all-time favourite artists on a different tack is Paul McCartney. I've never seen him. I've never seen him once. I've only seen David Bowie once, that first time in 1987, and so yeah, I agree with you. It's not a barometer to how big a fan you are. I mean, I know people, or I speak to people on Twitter who seem to have been to every gig, every tour. I've never really done that. Obviously, in this day and age, there's financial constraints, because obviously ticket prices are so
absolutely
high. And there is I'll tell you what not disappointing, maybe. I would have loved to have done the Broadway show, but obviously the tickets were so astronomical.
Yes.
But I would have loved to have brought the show to the West End in London. You know, I think that would have been good, even if it was just for a month.
I know a lot of people were hoping that.
Yeah.
Because often Broadway shows do that.
Yeah.
You know, Hamilton and others will go and will have a run there. And I guess I was actually a little surprised he didn't, because he has such a connection with his European fan base there at UK and all the other countries in Europe. There is a special love between Bruce and the band and those gigs. Like, I don't know if you were lucky enough to have Apple TV and watch the Letter to You documentary.
I haven't got Apple TV, but somebody did post it.
Okay.
A link to YouTube. I think it's got subtitles, so I think it's the Spanish link or what. But I still haven't got around to watching it yet. I mean, my wife bought me the Born to Run autobiography.
Yeah.
When it came out, and I've got so many books on my to read list. I still haven't got to that one yet.
I know that feeling.
But you're a big Bruce fan and you haven't got around to reading that yet. But I feel like a lot of the stories that he tells on Broadway, the Springsteen on Broadway, and the snippets of the book that I've read, you feel like Yeah, I've heard versions of this before over the years
Yeah.
through different interviews and what have you. But I definitely get around to reading the book and watching that film.
I think you will enjoy it. It is, but there is a scene in the Letter to You documentary where they talk about opening up shows like in Italy or Spain.
Mhm.
They mention venues in Europe and how, because, and I was lucky enough to talk to Maureen Van Zant.
Oh,
And she was lovely. She joined me on the show a couple of times, and she talked about it's all about the food and shopping. That like she's there for the shopping, and that Steven just adores the food. So he would tour just for the chance to eat all these great meals. So that's wonderful. Um, so you've already told me a lot of great stories about seeing him live. Any others you want to share?
oh, one that's just popped into my mind. You talked about Maureen Van Zandt. I don't know why this has just popped into my mind. I went to see Bruce in London. Was it 2008? Yeah, it was the Magic. It was the Magic tour. 'Cause I think George W. Bush was just coming to the end of his presidency,
Hmm.
and I went with a friend of mine, John, who's a big Bruce fan. But he's become more. My friend John, this is, he's become more apolitical over the years, and he sort of wasn't really. Bruce was talking a lot about rendition and the issues in America at the time during the tour, which even in the UK, you can relate to those similar kind of issues because I think we both went through the Iraq War and what have you.
Hmm.
So obviously, what I think Bruce would have known that he would, speaking about issues in America does translate to the UK. But that isn't the story. The story is that another friend was supposed to come, this Robert who I mentioned earlier, and he had started seeing a new girlfriend, and so he made a decision not to join us, but he'd already bought the ticket and paid me for the ticket. And I said to him, okay, I'll try and sell the ticket for you if I can. Anyway, I sold this ticket to a ticket tout outside the stadium for next to nothing. I think I got £10, if that. Anyway, when my friend had gone into the stadium, we've had a couple of drinks, and we're waiting for Bruce to come on, and all of a sudden, this drop dead gorgeous blonde American lady appears to our left, and then when the show starts and whatever, and we got talking throughout the gig, and I said, "Oh, did you buy your ticket outside?" He goes, "Oh yes, I'm working over here for about a year." She said, "And I've always been a Bruce fan. I've never seen Bruce live, and I live up the road." And she didn't know the gig was happening. She didn't know the concert was happening. She saw this line of people walking past, all with Springsteen t-shirts on and what have you. So she came out the front door, asked somebody what was going on. "Oh yeah, Bruce is playing at the stadium up the road." So she's gone and bought a ticket off a ticket tout, and she's bought the ticket that I sold. And so obviously I could have spent 4.5 hours stood next to a middle-aged balding man who was my friend Robert. But I spent 4 hours stood next to this drop-dead gorgeous American lady with blonde hair, and getting to sort of chat to her for so that was an interesting experience. That was before I got married, by the way.
Yeah, that is awesome. That is a great story. Um, I told the story before, but Dallas, Bruce was playing on a Tuesday night in Dallas for the River Tour, the second River Tour, and Sunday night there was WrestleMania in the Dallas area at the big Dallas Cowboy Stadium.
Yeah.
And so I was at a House of Blues. I was going to meet a bunch of different fans, and I was talking to someone outside, and he was actually the drummer on the local Dallas Springsteen cover band. I'm
Okay.
talking to him, I'm visiting, and all of a sudden someone came up, this two young lads, and they were both wearing WrestleMania jerseys, and they were Irish because you could hear the accent, and they said, I won't try to do an accent, they said, "Excuse me, you were talking about Bruce." I said, "Yeah." He said, "What's going on?" I said, "Oh," I said, "Well, Bruce is playing here tonight at the American Airlines Center, which is just like 3 blocks down the road." And they both looked like, "You're kidding. We were here for WrestleMania. We have tickets when he's going to tour in Dublin, but we did not know he was playing, and our flight leaves tonight." I said, "No, I'm sorry. Yeah, he's playing tonight." And I don't know if they went and called the airline and said, "Look, you've got to change our flight," or not. But they were so disappointed.
Oh,
And you can imagine, right? Like, you've flown all the way from Ireland, you're there. And if you just stay one more day, not only could you have gone to the WrestleMania, but you could have caught a Bruce show. So I always think of those two poor guys. Like, they look crushed, Paul. They were
well, at
just,
least they had tickets for Dublin, which
yes, they did.
yeah, which I believe he always does good shows in Dublin.
Yes.
My wife is from an Irish family, and we've been to Dublin a few times, and it's a good night out in Dublin. So I can imagine seeing Bruce in Dublin would be a good experience.
Yeah, I would love that. I think of all the places, if I had a wish list, right? If I had the TARDIS, and I could go to anywhere. I would love to see. I would love to see in a show in Australia, because that just
Mhm.
looks like a blast. And then
Yeah,
I would love Ireland. I think that would just be so much fun to see.
my still on my to-do list, on my bucket list, if you will, is to see Bruce in New York. Now, whether it's Madison Square Garden, Giant Stadium, but or Meadowlands, wherever. But
Hmm.
I thought, yeah, I'd like to see him in New York, in this sort of home neighborhood. I know it's New Jersey, but it's tri-state area and all that. I'd like to see him in his own neck of the woods, and also visit the Stone Pony.
Yes,
That's on the
absolutely,
to-do list as well.
absolutely. Um, so share with me, Paul. What are some of your favorite songs and albums that mean a lot to your family?
What in Bruce or just anything in particular?
Well, we'll stick with Bruce now, and then you can share other ones if you want.
Well, I love the early stuff. I do love the first three albums. I think are the ones I play the most.
Mm,
Ashby Park and Wild the Innocent and Born to Run. That said, I have got a soft spot for a lot of the later stuff. Like Magic is a fantastic album. I love Magic and The Rising, and but also I'd say Tunnel of Love is a particular. Obviously, it's Born in the Year. I mean, you can go through a whole list.
yes,
It depends on
absolutely.
you. It depends on your mood. I mean, I always think there's different eras of Bruce. Different, if you listen to. I always use the example. If you listen to "I'm on Fire,"
Yeah.
and then you listen to maybe "Night" from Born to Run, I've unless you're, I think you could say, the styles are completely poles apart between what he did back in the 70s and what, I mean, as I said earlier, I'm a David Bowie fan, and we all know that Bowie went through different changes throughout his career,
Hmm.
different styles of music and what have you. But I think Bruce has to a lesser degree. I mean, you had the twangy guitar of The River and Born in the USA, working on the highway, Darlington County, that opening sort of twang, which I love, which I probably first originated on the River album. But also you've got the hard guitar sort of from Adam Raised the Cain and Badlands. which is sort of resurfaced on Letter to You.
Yes.
Jane, what's that song now? Janie Needs a Shooter. I think that's what it's
Yes.
called. And then obviously you've got a few others. And I think of all the albums, on his later albums, Letter to You is more reminiscent of the stuff in the 70s, especially around the darkness on the Edge of Town era. Especially, you listen to Janie Needs a Shooter and I Were a Priest and even Ghosts, and you think, yeah, these could be on Darkness quite easily.
Yeah.
So I do love this new album. I always tend to play to death the new albums anyway, because
Sure.
and when you listen to it the first time, because with Bruce so much has come before, and it's hard not to compare. It's hard not to compare what he's doing now with the stuff that he's done before. So you'll listen to it and you think, and sort of a sense of almost disappointment sort of engulfs you. But then you listen to it again, then you listen to it again, and then by the time you've listened to it for a 10th time, it's your favourite album.
Yeah, exactly.
And you think, and so you sort of, it's like Stallone in Rocky. You write him off at your peril.
Yeah, exactly.
Keep getting back up.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That it is amazing what he can do, and I think it's amazing that at this age, 71, that he's putting out new music.
Yes.
And it's just, I love that. I love it so much. Yeah.
It does amaze me. I mean, there used to be a running joke. I went to see the Rolling Stones in London in 1999.
Okay.
And we were on a tube train coming out of central London, my brother and I, to see the Rolling Stones at Wembley Stadium. And the train driver or conductor, whatever he was, he came over the PA and he said, ladies and gentlemen, just like to announce anybody going to Wembley for the Rolling Stones concert tonight, it has been cancelled. And everyone on the train is going, oh, why has that been cancelled? And then this train guy said, Mick Jagger can't find his Zimmer frame. And everybody said, oh, he's joking, blah, blah, blah. But at the time, I think Mick Jagger would only have been about 50, maybe a bit older than that, 50. And I thought, and that was a joke back then. And when you think, the two best albums of last year, for me, obviously Letter to You, but also McCartney 3. And McCartney's 78. And you're listening to it, and I think, this guy's the same age as my dad.
Yes.
My dad who needs a walking stick and to get from A to B, and he's got type 2 diabetes and this, that, and the other. And you think, God, and this guy is churning out this amazing music that, I mean, I do listen to modern bands. I like to keep, there's a couple of groups, the Seagirls was a band over here last year who did a really good album. But you're listening to that sort of music, any modern band. And I've got a friend, Keith, who only listens to modern bands.
Okay.
He doesn't listen to, he believes music is for the here and now, which I don't completely disagree with. But you listen, and I go to gigs with him sometimes, and I listen to the new bands. But you can always hear old music in these new bands. You'll listen to something and you think, that's been done before, even if it's a chord change or a bass riff or a drum solo. You listen to it, you think, I've heard that before 30 years ago in that particular song on that particular album. Case in point, one of my favourite albums is The Joshua Tree by U2. And Bullet the Blue Sky opens with the exact same drum beat as When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin on Led Zeppelin 4. It's not even disguised. It's a complete rip-off, basically.
Sure.
Of the, but that's the thing. I remember there was a music journalist in the UK a few years ago, and he said, these things aren't surprising because there's only so many chords, there's only so many chord changes and different sort of riffs that people can come up with over time. So that's why you'll listen to Letter to You and you'll think, yeah, that sounds reminiscent of what he's done so many years ago, because especially with his lyrics, you'll listen to Bruce's lyrics and he does sort of like to repeat a theme, as it were, or repeat a sort of a particular type of lyric over his songs. I think, especially in the 80s, he used to put sure a lot in his music.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of a sentence. Johnny 99, Atlantic City, I forget the lyric now, but it has sure at the end of it an awful lot. And so, I think if you're a songwriter, you're going to revisit stuff you've done in the past, even if it's subconsciously, because as I say, there's only so many sort of different types of lyric and chords that you could actually come up with.
Absolutely, I agree. This has been so much fun, Paul. I just appreciate it so much. Yeah, I've had a great time. What should have I asked you that I didn't?
You should ask me the Mary question.
Nope, that's what I'll end with. Before I get to the Mary question, anything else I should be asking you?
Oh, I can't think of anything else. Okay. Do you know, I'm the kind of guy, when we finish doing this, about 10 o'clock tonight, when I'm having my cocoa, I'm going to think, I should have said that,
yeah, or
this or this and the other. But you can't remember. I mean, I'm 51 now, and yeah. Bruce has been performing for as long as I've been alive. Yeah. So you condense that into a 1 hour conversation.
Well, and
impossible.
He's been a companion for your life.
Absolutely.
When he says you'll need a good companion for this part of the ride, and I always think his music is that. When that line from Land of Hope and Dreams.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So if you are a friend of Paul's and you're listening to this, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. But you may be asking, what's the Mary question? So the Mary question is Jay Armstrong, who is an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area. He just recently retired. Would spend 2 days in his honors English class with his seniors, and they would take the poem Thunder Road and they would break it apart. They would look at all the lyrics, they would look at the imagery and the themes of the song. And at the end of the 2 days, Jay looked at his class and said, okay, does Mary get in the car? So, Paul, that is your question. At the end of Thunder Road, does Mary get in the car?
I always think she does. The reason I think she does get in the car is because even when Bruce is at his most downbeat, I think my favourite Bruce song is Downbound Train off Born in the USA. Again, twangy guitar, but it's just a beautiful crafted and well-written song. But obviously it's not a very... Obviously it's about a time in the character's life where he's not going through a particularly good time. But I think even with a song like that, I think predominantly Bruce's music is quite optimistic. And I don't think that the song itself, Thunder Road, would have ended with Mary not getting in the car. I think basically the character, there's a line in the song, isn't there? You're not that good looking, but you're all right.
Right.
But also, he's downplaying his own sort of talents. I'm no hero. That's
Yes.
understood, or the redemption I can offer you beneath the study. I've got this guitar, I've learned how to make it talk. He's basically saying, look, I'm not great, but neither are you, but we may as well not be great together.
Yes.
And I think there is, and that again speaks to a lot of people, because that is 99% of the world. That is, you know, the one thing I dislike about modern sort of TV culture and is even ugly people have to be good. I mean, I remember a show called Ugly Betty. I don't think they make it anymore.
Yeah.
But what I disliked about Ugly Betty, even Betty was good looking. She wasn't ugly.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Amy Schumer does something like this when she does her stand-up routine. She talks about this, and you know, Kevin Hart getting off with Cameron Diaz or whatever it is, and you see where she's coming from. But yeah, I think the whole point of Bruce, he speaks to people, like I said at the top of the show, who aren't in that 1% good-looking, athletic. Who can articulate themselves perfectly. And Bruce in interviews, I mean, I think he's better now, but when I first saw him in interviews, he tried to articulate himself, but you could tell he speaks slowly with a long drawl. And I always thought to myself, he's thinking hard about trying to sound, you know, he's not this sort of Ivy League grade A student, you know, who can, you know, the sort of person you'd see on, in an American courtroom, the top lawyer who can think of an argument off the top of their hat. And I'm like that. You know, you ask me a question, or you know, I have to think long and hard to debate within myself what my answer is going to be. And when I do speak, I don't want it to come out and sound like gobbledygook. You know, and so I get that a lot. But going back to whether Mary got in the car or not, I always thought she did. And for years, I always thought the sequel to the song was The River.
Right.
Primarily because the character's name is Mary in the river as well. But then I've been thinking about this, and I thought, well, I don't think the guy in Thunder Road would be the same guy in the river, because I don't think he would settle for a union coat or working for the Johnstown Company or what have you. I don't think he would settle for that. I think he'd probably be more like the character, as I said to you on Twitter, in Nebraska. Picking up Mary, who's twirling her baton, who then gets in the car and they go on a killing spree. I think it's more. Yeah. I think listening to the getting a feel for the character in Thunder Road, I think is more, and there's a line, isn't there, like a killer in the sun in that song. So yes. I think he's more inclined to go on a killing spree with Mary than he is to settle down to a life of domestic upheaval rather than bliss, which is what the river is all about. I don't think he will be that character. And I think she will be attracted, but I think she will be attracted by the danger of that particular character. Because at the end of the day, her character itself is sort of at the last chance saloon by what you read between the lines of the lyric. And she's looking for somebody to come and sweep her off her feet. And I think she's finally realising that that's not going to happen, and this guy might be the best thing or the only chance to sort of, it's a town full of losers. We're pulling out of here to win. She can either remain and be a loser, or she can join this guy and win in inverted commas, because I don't think with their lives there would be any sort of victory ahead. But it sets up the rest of his work, because obviously that song, I think, that closing line, it's a town full of losers, we're pulling out here to win, is a sort of pessimistically optimistic line. There's an irony there, I think. And when you listen to the songs on Darkness on the Edge of Town and the River, you think, yeah, they left that optimism and sort of drove headlong into a world of pessimistic, sort of downtrodden, sort of hardship, as it were. And most of his songs between then and Born in the USA, and even To Under a Love, even though that was more personal to him, deal with characters who don't have, whose life hasn't panned out the way they thought it would do. I think I think that sort of everyone can relate to that. I mean, even if you have a good or a nice life, and I've got a good life, I've got a great wife, I've got a good job, but even I can sit back sometimes and say, "Oh, if you'd have told me when I was 20 that this would be my life now, I'm 50, you'd think, oh no." You think it was something else. So yeah, and I think Bruce captures that in his songs more than most songwriters do.
I think you're well said. I totally agree. This has been great. You are a wonderful guest. I love all your stories. If someone wants to reach you, are you on any social media?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Paul Thomas Hamer. Is it PT? Hold on, it'll be at PT Hamer on Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm on Facebook as well. Just Paul Hamer on Facebook.
Okay.
I think there's a few of us. So, but yeah, I think I'm the only at PT Hamer on the Twitter, if I think. And
Okay.
so yeah, so they can chase me up there if they want to.
That sounds great. All right. Just thank you. Any final thoughts you want to share?
Oh no, this has been absolutely enjoyed this. It's not, my wife's not a big Springsteen. Well, she's not a Springsteen fan at all. It's
Yes.
like opposites attract. She's not. And as I said earlier, I don't know that many people who get his music like I get it and yourself gets it. So it's good to sort of chat to somebody who sort of who does really. And yeah, I've really enjoyed this.
Well, you were a great guest, and I love the idea. One of my favorite things is finding people on Twitter that are talking about Bruce, and we reach out and we're able to visit. And so, thank you for taking part of your day visiting with me, Paul. I hope you and your family stay safe.
Thank you.
Let's all hope that soon we're going to get out of this pandemic and we're going to meet for a show and share a meal and just enjoy life again.
Absolutely. And my one final thought, which I was going to
Yes.
say to you earlier, when Bruce does tour again, I'm really hoping he starts every show with the song Tequila by the Champ.
Oh, I
That's
love
what I
that.
want him to do. That would just make my day. Say, yeah, stick two fingers up to those people and say, yeah, tequila.
That is funny. I have not heard that, and I love that. This is so wonderful. Thank you, Paul. All right,
Yeah,
listeners, you stay safe. Remember to social distance. Remember to wash your hands. Remember to wear an effing mask. Let's all be good to each other because that's the only way we're going to get through this. And for now, thank you. Be careful, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye. Doing a podcast at times can be a one way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts as well as a Mary Question t shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash and right now, who does? You can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.
So, thank you, Paul. That was great.
No, I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, are you any chance you're are you a Doctor Who fan?
My wife's a big. I do like Doctor Who. My wife's a big Doctor Who fan as well. We haven't really watched much of the latest one.
Okay.
With the female Doctor Who, but I think we're more David Tennant, Matt Smith types.
Yeah. Okay.
We do love. Yeah. So we do like Doctor Who. Absolutely. I remember. I grew up with Doctor Who in the 80s and the 70s with Tom Baker and John Pertwee. So I've sort of been, and I sort of lost interest when in the 80s. I thought the storylines became a little bit childish in a way, but I think the latest ones, starting with Christopher Eccleston through to David Tennant and Matt Smith, and we're really good stories, and yeah.
Yeah, I do a Doctor Who podcast as well, and so I try to work on a Springsteen reference every once in a while when I'm talking to my buddy, and we did a fun episode to celebrate the 5th year, 5-year episode, 5 years of doing Set Listing Bruce. My buddy Charles, who I do the Next Stop Everywhere with, which is our Doctor Who podcast, we each picked 5 shows that we would go to if we had a TARDIS. And to go, and so he picked 5 concerts in the past. I picked 5 concerts in the past, and I always joke that if someone, every once in a while, someone on Twitter will say, "If you had the TARDIS, where would you go?" And I said I'd go to every Bruce show ever. I just would go jump from show to show to show and see that. So, well, good. Well, when you get a chance, check out Jodie. I think she's very good. It's especially very different after Capaldi. Tennant's my favorite Doctor. I loved him as the 10th Doctor. But I'm a fan of all the modern Doctors. I
did like Peter Capaldi. I was surprised they went with him. I thought he was really. I liked his. I'm a big Gemma Coleman fan. And I think the Tomorrow Girl, the character she played, that is still my favourite sidekick of all the sidekicks. I really loved her sidekick.
Yeah, she's great. All right. Well, thank you. I've kept you long enough. Thank you, my friend.
You
stay safe, and we had a great time. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you, Jesse.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.